Today's video will explain the dummy double. Hello, I'm James Helfrich. It is the goal of every unit test to test one thing and one thing only. We only want to test the subject and not other dependencies. But what do we do when the subject has dependencies? Well, one of these tools is to use something called a dummy. The dummy is a stand-in for a class that is a dependency that we do not want to test. This video will demonstrate how to create a dummy and how to use them to isolate a single test. The double stands in for a principal, so the subject can be better isolated. So we start with the subject, and this is the class we want to test. Now, unfortunately, the subject has a dependency on some other class, and we'll call this the principal. And how is this dependency? It could be inheritance, it could be composition, it could be aggregation. Right now, it's just a relationship. Now, what the double does is it stands in for the principal, and it does this by deriving off the principal. Now, one special type of double is called a dummy. And a dummy is a double that has the same interfaces as the principal, but asserts if any are called. So that double is replaced with a dummy. So a dummy is derived from the principal, and all methods except the constructor have an assert false to ensure they are never called. For an example, here I have the class called direction, and the direction has radians and has a constructor and a getter and 3 setters. So the first thing I do to make a double for direction is I replace all the public methods except the constructor with virtual. And this allows me to make a derived class off direction. Now I'm going to create a derived class off direction, and I'll call this dummy direction, and it's going to derive off of it. And it's going to have a constructor, which is just going to call the regular constructor. And now all the methods are going to assert false. Now take a close look at getRadians. GetRadians asserts false, but it also returns 0, and that's because getRadians has a double return type. Now, if the unit test ever calls any of the methods from dummy direction, an assert will notify us of this. So now I'd like to integrate my dummy into the application. First of all, I have the set speed direction, and this is the method under test. Now observe that if speed equals 0, I just set dx and dy to 0. Only if it's not equal 0 do I then use the direction. Now my unit test is going to have a velocity, which I wanted to set up, and it's also going to have a direction. But I don't actually need the direction when my speed is 0.0. So I'm going to replace direction with dummy direction, and this ensures that direction is not called during this test. Let's take a look at a more involved example here. Here we have a game of chess, and a chess has a board that has 64 pieces, and each piece can be one of a space, pawn, knight, bishop, rook, queen, or king. The piece also has a position, and of course the board has a stack and an undo stack and a redo stack of moves. Now what I would like to do is test get current move and white turn. Now observe that get current move and white turn don't actually take a look at the board. So therefore, I'm going to replace the 64 pieces with a piece dummy. And if the queen or the bishop or space or any of those ever gets called, I want to be notified. So let's see how that works. Okay, let's take a look at the code. The first step of creating any kind of double, especially a dummy, is to make the principal virtual methods. So I'm going to take this piece class and I'm going to make a virtual version of it. Okay, I'm finished. Now I'm going to compile it, make sure I didn't make any mistakes. Okay, now I'm going to make a copy, and I'm going to call this guy piece dummy. Okay, now that we fixed all our compile errors, let's take a look at what we did. So first of all, piece dummy derives off of piece, and so it has to have constructors. We need to be able to create one. And everything else is going to assert false, assert false. Now notice that some of these methods have to actually return something, in this case, a piece. So I have to find some convenient thing to return, like a Boolean true, 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 an integer 0, a position, whatever. It doesn't matter what value we're returning because we're going to assert false before it. But the only thing we want to make sure is that anytime any method gets called, we get notified with an assert. Okay, now that my dummy is finished, the next step is to integrate it into my unit test. So I'm going to navigate over to my test board. So I have two methods, get current move and white turn. Neither of these should look at the board in any capacity. Therefore, it should be safe to put dummies in there. So here I have test board, get current move, and I'm going to start with the initial board. Now, the problem is this board is filled with actual pieces. So I want to fill it with something that are not pieces. I want to fill them with my new dummy pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to free all the pieces that are currently there and then replace them with my dummy pieces. So for my first go ahead, I'm going to loop through all the different pieces in the board, and I'm going to delete the old one that was there, which is a pawn or a space or a rook or a knight. I'm going to replace with my new dummy piece. When I run the program, it does in fact compile, and so I'm good to go. Okay, now I'm going to have to do this for all of the different types of current move unit tests. So therefore, I want to put this code into a helper function. And I'm going to call this create dummy board. Okay, now that I'm done, let's compile it, make sure it works. Build succeeded. All right. And all the unit tests pass. Excellent. Okay, now that I've integrated create dummy board in the get current move initial, I need to do the same thing for all the other unit tests. So I'm going to do it here and here and here. When I'm finished, one last execution to make sure that I got it right, and we'll see that now my unit tests are far more isolated from the rest of the program. To learn more about this, take a look at the dummy section of the Unit Test 2 chapter of the Software Design textbook.